a critical mass here. So I'm going to go ahead and kick things off. Thank you, everybody, for joining tonight. My name's Christian Loredo. I am the Director of Innovation and Entrepreneurism for the Columbia Alumni Club here in Northern California. So what I'm trying to do as part of my contribution and volunteering to our club is put on a series of panels around several different topics. We've had one on financial technology or fintech, and tonight's panel is on biotech. So again, we've got three very exciting, and we're very fortunate to have experts in this space. And without further ado, I guess we can go ahead and start off with the panelist introductions. Michal, would you like to go first?
Sure, happy to. So my name is, just one second. I think we all learned to be tolerant of technology during COVID. So I have a bit of an improvisation here with my phone, and it just, a call just came in. So anyway, so Michal Preminger, I had Johnson & Johnson Innovation in East North America. Johnson & Johnson Innovation is the early innovation external partnering arm for all of J&J's businesses, including pharmaceuticals/biotech, medical devices, and consumer. I've been in this role for about 3 years, and happy to talk a little bit later about our model as it interfaces with both biotech and academia. Before joining J&J, I led the Office of Technology Development at Harvard, worked with Harvard Medical School faculty to engage with industry, to launch new companies, and to mobilize their innovation into development. And so became not only familiar with, but also maybe the first to develop new models in acceleration and incubation out of academia. And then before that, I was in the biotech industry and did a little bit of a tour in tech. I know that there are multiple tech people here, and actually worked in the Bay Area for a tech company, which had nothing to do with my education, which is in medicine and science, but had to do with my MBA, which I got from INSEAD, and led me to do this detour in tech in order to acquire business skills and then eventually apply them in the field of biotech and healthcare. And the only thing I will say to finalize this quick introduction is that my passion is in mobilizing science to get to the market and to benefit people and patients. And I love to do it in the early stage where the interface between science and business is really kind of the key to making an impact. So thanks for the opportunity to talk with everyone here tonight. And thank you, Christian, for moderating.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Michal. Next, Ron, would you like to make a quick introduction? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure. I'm Ron Katz. I'm an Associate Director of Licensing with Columbia Technology Ventures. We are the Technology Transfer Office of Columbia University. I have been at Columbia 21 years. I did my PhD in neuroscience at Columbia and an executive MBA at Columbia, and have been with the Tech Transfer Office for 15 years, focused on licensing and commercialization of early stage life science assets, whether that's through licensing to existing companies or through helping faculty members and entrepreneurs spin out companies based on university intellectual property. And I'm happy to be here and have this discussion. And thank you, Christian, and looking forward to the discussion.
Excellent. Thank you, Ron. And last but not least, we have Andrew. If you can please make an introduction.
I'm Andrew Satz. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Evolve. We're a technology company that leverages artificial intelligence to accelerate the speed and lower the failure rates of antibody discovery and development. I'm a data scientist by training. I went to develop my undergrad and graduate degree in data science at Columbia. And just, you know, our company is focused on applying machine learning. We have, our team has a expertise in machine learning, computational biology, software engineering, and antibody discovery, really to accelerate the discovery of antibodies. As a lot of you have probably heard about antibodies in the COVID pandemic, but what many people aren't aware of is that 6 of the top 10 selling drugs in the world are antibodies. So we're really trying to help accelerate that process by leveraging computational technology.
Fantastic, fantastic. Thank you very much. Like I said, we've got a really special panel tonight. We've got a lot of expertise that we'll be hearing from. And as we go through some of the questions that we'll be discussing, I'm going to try to leave some time towards the end for Q&A. But I think it'll probably be easiest if folks can open up the chat window if you have questions, and go ahead and type your questions in there. And then, like I said, I'll leave some time towards the end, and we'll get through as many as we can. So this is going to be sort of a fun, fluid discussion, really. And like I've said in the beginning, we're going to try to cover 3 topics. So the first one of those is really just general biotech and COVID. And the first question I have for the panelists here is, you know, what are some of the most exciting new areas of emerging science that are feeding into biotech and shaping the future of healthcare? And anybody can chime in here from the panelists.
Sure, I'll go first. I mean, obviously in the field that we're in, I would argue that the application of computational technology to the field of biotech and pharma has been pretty heavy. I think what COVID has demonstrated is that not only can the biotech industry, when it's laser focused on one problem, can move really quickly, but I think what it's done is generated a whole host of new technological applications, because people, whether they came from the biotech and pharma or the life sciences, or not, everyone seemed to be applying the resources, all the papers coming out from all sorts of different areas about how we could apply different technologies to solve this problem. And kind of think about it in the way that when we were doing the race to the stars and all the technology that came out from that, in a similar way, I think that we're seeing this coalescing of all these new technologies being applied to solve some of these problems. And I think that what we're also seeing is that because we were able to move so quickly to not solve the problem, but actually to alleviate the challenges that were surrounding COVID, at least in the Western world, that it kind of further spurred the impetus to move even faster and be more effective in getting solutions to patients, which I think was already there, but now I think it's spurred by the competition that's going to be driven to get there even faster.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I'll add in, at least at the university setting in New York City, when the pandemic hit, all the labs had to close unless they were working on COVID. So almost everybody who could switched their academic focus to COVID, which led to a lot of interesting new discoveries and new angles of scientists tackling the problem from their area of expertise. And so I think that led to a lot of innovation. I don't think we expected the vaccines to come on the market as quickly as they have, and sort of mitigating some of the effects in the Western world. And we're still, many academics are still continuing to work on sort of the hallmarks of coronaviruses in general. So in the event of the next, unfortunately, potentially next pandemic, we'll be prepared. And so, you know, a renewed focus in infectious disease, looking at how to inhibit viral entry into cells regardless of the virus, and sort of new technologies and approaches to sort of tackle the problem for very many different disciplines.
Excellent.
I'm happy to add to that. I mean, I absolutely agree with what has been said. I just add that biotech, even before COVID, was at a very, very special moment in its history. And there were multiple trends and multiple realities that contributed to opportunity for a revolution. So Andrew mentioned data science, absolutely, the availability, the collection and the availability and accessibility and the ability to analyze large amounts of data that represent new sources of insights. It was one of those trends. Another is the flow of just amazing science here in our neighborhood where we're having this meeting today at UC Berkeley. Gene editing was awarded a Nobel Prize, and this is only one example of many just revolutionary, transformational discoveries and developments that are coming from academia that enable just dramatic new understanding of biology and engagement. So one of those, one of the impacts of this science trend is that it used to be the case that we could only address certain diseases where there were targets, drug targets, that were tractable. And I think I can quite confidently say that this is changing dramatically. And we are moving into an era in which any drug target can be targeted with the richness of new modalities and new approaches, some driven computationally and others just driven by good, what I will call engineering and new biology that is enabling them. And then in addition to that, I think as consumers, you all make note of the ownership of wellness and health by people who are using many more tools to quantify themselves, to monitor their health, and are interested in owning their health. And so I'll call this the empowered patient. And finally, for a revolution, there always needs to be some crisis. And I think the crisis pre-COVID that we were all facing was the cost of healthcare that has become unsustainable and unacceptable. And so new models became needed that are focused more on early detection, on interception and prevention. But this was not moving very quickly. And we were just on the verge of this revolution for a long time, and then came COVID and created this perfect storm for things like data science and telemedicine and the patient-centric approaches to start shining, because we needed to find the patients where they were. We needed to deliver the medicine in a way that is convenient for the patient. We needed to recruit for clinical trials and conduct them at the patient's home. And so suddenly we found ourselves in a situation where each one of us, when you call your doctor today, they ask you, are you looking for an appointment in person or through telemedicine, which we could continue dreaming about for a long time. So I'll just say prevention and interception are now understood to be the future, whether it's infectious disease and any other disease. Recently, I mean, just this week, Flagship Pioneering in Boston declared the closing of a $3.4 billion fund for early stage innovation that is focused on what they call preemptive medicine, health defense, which is exactly this notion of early detection, interception, and prevention, vaccines, but not only vaccines. And the final thing that I would say that COVID put a mirror in front of us, recognizing that manufacturing and supply chain are extremely important elements. And again, here in the Bay Area, Arch Ventures has started National Resilience, and a little bit of south of Northern California, a SPAC enabled a Boston company called Ginkgo to channel $2.5 billion into new synthetic biology approaches that will transform manufacturing and create new modalities. And maybe as the last, I know I've taken it maybe a little too long, but pretty passionate about this. I'll just say that at every dinner table now in your homes, you know how to talk about mRNA vaccines. And mRNA before COVID was this speculative, very high risk technology that nobody believed would work. And now it does. And it is one example of a new modality that is used in biotech. And the impact of this success is going to be dramatic because there are multiple other new modalities that have been tried and have been hoped and have been kind of the dream of innovators. And now they're going to have a chance because there is so much capital flowing into new modalities. So sorry I took so long.
No problem. That was a wonderful answer and a perfect foray into my next question, which was really talking about, describe new and evolving incubation and early stage funding. And some of the examples that you just gave when you're talking about multiple billions of dollars going into some of these funds is pretty unique. But perhaps, Ron or Andrew, how, if you have anything to add to that, but in particular, how the seed and early stage investment landscape has evolved given the extensive flow of capital into biotech, especially during COVID.
So on the academic side, I can say there's definite renewed interest in new modalities and infectious disease. Mm-hmm. At Columbia, there's a couple of years ago was announced a new funding sort of paradigm called Hudson Heights Innovations, where Deerfield Capital invested or committed $130 million to invest in new technologies and new companies that will come out of the university over a 10-year period. So we're seeing more interest in sort of with investment firms looking to do broader relationships with universities. And I think Deerfield has formed 17 academic relationships that are similar. And there's a lot of activity in New York.
Ron, I think you froze up here.
Never a dull moment on Zoom.
Yeah. And Andrew, I know that if you'd love to chime in on this question, coming at it from sort of your perspective.
Ron is back. Ron,
you're back, Ron. Okay.
Oh, you're back? Okay, I was about to move. I don't know where I left off. But I was just saying there's new sort of large investment hedge funds are looking to invest in early stage research, which they weren't before. So I think that's a new exciting development.
Yeah.
It's interesting because I feel like we're the tables have turned and we're on the pitching end, we're on the receiving end of pitches from investors as an early stage company. And it's been now we have I think because of just the state of the market right now and the real high demand to get into biotech, and there's been an absurd amount of money being thrown into biotech, which is great because I think it's a really expensive field to operate in. And I think that one of the things that I'm a pretty big proponent of as a founder is how do you figure out, especially in the age of digital, how can we start to leverage the fact that we can get customers pretty quickly and try things out from an experimental side, which you couldn't really do before, but now there's a lot of possibility to build things that don't require, let's say, the heavy investment that would be needed to build out a laboratory, large amounts of investment capital in biotech, especially as you see more software eating biology. And so I think that there's an opportunity to kind of juggle investment with revenue. And I think that there is that opportunity that didn't really exist before in the biotech space, where everything was very binary. The outcome was you either knocked it out of the park and had a multi-billion-dollar exit, or hundreds of millions of dollars exit, or nothing. And so I think that there's now, with more as a technologist and thinking about through that lens, seeing more technology operating, I think there are ways to think about that, and that actually I think sets a standard going forward that at least at the intersection of technology and biology, where the investors who actually speak both sides of that space can actually understand that there's an opportunity early on. So especially for somebody who comes from outside of biotech.
Right, right. And then just to follow up on that, it's really exciting to hear about, the tables being turned, like you mentioned, Andrew, and instead of doing the pitches, it seems like investors are finding opportunities in biotech, and there's quite a bit going on, and the cadence of development just seems to be increasing at a pace that's it makes the field even more exciting. But given the trends of capital flow, because we're talking about some big dollars here, does that differ by geography? And if so, can you speak a little bit about that? Where are these dollars going? Maybe globally.
Maybe I can talk. Maybe I can take a step back and talk a little bit about the capital, just for a couple of minutes. So interestingly, COVID actually led to a lot of interest from the public. I mean, we talked about it at a different level, but that interest was trying to translate into investment, and I think the definitely the stock market allowed that kind of investment. But the appearance of the SPAC tool, not only in other industries, but its entry into biotech, which was untypical prior to COVID, has really led to a different type of maybe enablement that actually crosses geographies. So venture capital money traditionally was concentrated in innovation hubs like the Boston area, like the Bay Area, and definitely a few others across the nation and the world. The availability of capital now from less traditional sources, as well as just the virtual world in which we operate, has opened up opportunities for innovators in other geographies to access capital. Still, I mean, in general, I would say it is easier to raise capital if you are in a major hub, but I think the playing field has been flattened a little bit through those trends. One thing that I will say, and this is building on what Andrew said about reversing the tables, the fact that a company can now go public either through an IPO or through a SPAC at the preclinical stage, or choose to continue developing has just made a dramatic change in the whole ecosystem, because there is less of a need for early stage partnering. There is more of an opportunity for companies to create more value for the team and for shareholders by continuing to innovate. At the same time, biotech is very complicated and development is even more complicated, and there is a need to balance that autonomy with the traditional contribution that larger companies, pharma in particular, has brought to the table in terms of expertise in regulatory, in manufacturing and supply chain, in scale up, and so on. So this remains a desirable element in the evolution of a technology, just because it allows acceleration and enhancement of probability of success, not necessarily on the financial side, but more on the expertise.
Excellent. Thank you. I'm going to ask one more question on this, the first bucket of questions that we're going to cover, and then we'll move over to the technology and business model section. But one of the questions that we discussed earlier that would love to hear some answers from the panelists on is, how is the biotech industry responding to the realities exposed by COVID and growing awareness regarding racial injustice and disparity awareness? So I'm kind of switching gears with.
I'm happy to answer it, but I don't know if Andrew and Ron want to go first. I have definitely.
Sorry, Christian, the sound cut up for just a second for me. Can you repeat the question?
No problem, no problem. So the question was, how is the biotech industry responding to the realities exposed by COVID and the growing awareness regarding racial injustice and disparity awareness?
So I'll chime in here. So as a data scientist, I sort of was really looking at, I started digging into a lot of the data and some of the challenges we were trying to address in the pharma industry. One thing that really surprised me was the representation in clinical trials. There was a disease, there's a disease called multiple myeloma. It's significantly more, it's a blood disease and a cancer, and it affects individuals of African-American descent significantly more than non-African-American patients. And when I saw a clinical trial, only about 10% of the patients, or less than 10% of the patients, I think it was like 6% of the patients in the trial were African-American. And there was a long way to go to, I think, and there are a whole bunch of reasons for that. I mean, part of it, I think, has to do with cultural history, where you look at the Tuskegee experiments, but then also you look at where the centers of excellence are for clinical trial design, whether it's Memorial Sloan Kettering on the Upper East Side, as an example of that. And you know, it just skews in that direction, right? You don't have African Americans are not heavily concentrated in the Upper East Side in the way that they are, for example, in the Upper Manhattan. And so I think there's a whole host of reasons, and without actually taking an active effort to solve that problem, I think that continued. And so I've seen there's a ton of sort of recognition of that, and now action. And so we're seeing that more and more in how clinical trials are being redesigned, in efforts to really integrate, make sure that those who are at the top or who are sitting as faces are representative. I mean, you look at the head of bio, the CEO of bio is African-American woman, and I think this is the first time we've ever seen an African-American woman, which is bio is like the main representing body for the biotech industry. And so I think that there's been a lot more recognition of that, but there's a long way to go. And so I think that there needs to be more active engagement. But I think that at least there's recognition, and there's starting to be action, which is, you know, obviously admitting the problem and then doing something about it.
Excellent.
Maybe I'll add to that, just because I think what you said is extremely relevant. And let's just remember, we just talked about the telemedicine and access revolution or acceleration that happened thanks to COVID. I think that actually enables the democratization of clinical trials to start with, and also delivery, where previously, I think you were right, Andrew, to mention clinical trials were done, you know, in a site. You had to be there in person. It was usually done in the top academic medical centers, not accessible practically and not accessible for other reasons to a lower income or other challenged populations. And now we have created the playbook to hold clinical trials at patient home. And so it becomes possible. Beyond that, Andrew, it was absolutely correct to mention that there is a serious commitment, not only to a discussion about diversity and inclusion, but also action. Companies like J&J have been committed to this idea that the company itself needs to be representative of the ultimate patient and consumer population, but has found it difficult to reach that representation. And the level of enhanced emphasis and drive through individual goals and objectives and incentives is really unprecedented, but it's not just unique to J&J. It is actually adopted across the biotech and pharma industry. So there is a long way to go, like Andrew said, but there is a serious reference to this, as well as I would say that that diseases that were neglected in the past, so sickle cell disease, which is maybe kind of the poster child of African American population, now thanks to progress made and discoveries made on the biology side and these new modalities that we were talking about, now we have multiple potential therapies in development, including, again, I mentioned CRISPR and I mentioned Jennifer Dana here in Berkeley, and one of her startups is actually developing a sickle cell therapy. So there is more attention to diseases that are overrepresented in the Black and people of color population. So there is some reason to be hopeful, but we really can't make this just a wave of attention. We have to continue sustaining that focus.
And I just want to add one thing related to COVID. When we were licensing therapeutic antibodies that were developed at Columbia University for potential treatment, it was extremely important to make sure that any licensee was making that available in the developing world at cost or at affordable prices, and Columbia would waive any royalty obligations for those sales, and just making sure that there was access and affordable access to all for any potential therapeutic treatments that came out.
And maybe I'll also mention that in the development of the COVID vaccine, J&J made sure that there is proportional representation of all populations, and this was possible thanks to the kind of data science efforts that Andrew was talking about earlier. So in general, the expedition or the acceleration of the development was very much enabled by data science approaches, where our team had we actually put in place a collaboration with MIT in this case, where we had a very detailed map of the virus prevalence, and we had teams on the ground in multiple countries and multiple communities waiting to deploy recruitment where we could actually find the virus, but at the same time making sure that we're having that diversity representation. This could not have been done in an era where we didn't have the technology to do it in real time and deploy in such a just fantastically modernized and revolutionary way.
I just want to add one thing about this. I also think that we're going to see a spike in infectious disease research and work, which predominantly affects tropical regions, so Africa, Latin America, Southeast Asia, where we haven't seen heavy investment into it before in the way that we did in the past. And so I think that it's going, like all of this investment is actually going to benefit a lot of those regions which historically couldn't afford that. But that's where a lot of the research is going to happen. A lot of the clinical trials are going to happen. And so populations that historically would not have been served because it wasn't cost effective will now be served because of the increased research and contributions of science to those areas, which, as I said, historically in the past few years haven't really received a lot of investment. Right.
I feel compelled to make a quick comment in this context. I think COVID has taught us that there is only one health that the world needs to own, and that folds into it just the health of all people, the health of animals, because they are the ones who are actually hosting those viruses that eventually will make it into human, and the health of the environment, which offers, through global warming, opportunities for these viruses to and other potential pathogens and disasters to affect human health, and even heat or the temperature and other elements cause allergies and other health issues. So the connectivity between human, animals, and the planet is now recognized, and biotech is one of the industries that stands to be able to address some of those challenges across the board. I would add food, just because food is so closely linked to the environment and has such strong impact, whether it's agriculture, growing food or growing animals for food and their health and so on. So this is as we look into the future, the biotech industry is going to cover more than the diseases that we traditionally addressed, mostly later stage, fatal diseases or common chronic diseases. And so there is a lot to look forward to. And again, new modalities, new approaches like synthetic biology. I'll mention again Ginkgo as a company that enjoyed the public attention and was able to do a big SPAC from a group that is not a traditional biotech group in LA, a Hollywood group, right? So very, very interesting future that I think when we maybe meet again in a few years, it will be quite amazing to see how much the face of this industry changed and the scope has expanded.
Yeah, that's a phenomenal responses. Thank you to everyone. It's really interesting to hear about the amount of change, what's happening now at the clinical trial level, the increased rate of inclusion, and then Michal, with that really more holistic response, taking into consideration environment. Very, very fascinating stuff, and it's nice to see that you're thinking about things other than just actual medicines. So yeah, thank you. In light of time, I'm going to switch gears again and go to some of the other questions, which I think is also, especially in the Bay Area, people's minds, which is really around the technology that's helping, create some of these changes and some of these advancements, really. So this one, feel free to chime in on, but this one's probably geared more to Andrew. But what is the future role of data science in biotech innovation? You talked a little bit about, some of the, making things possible today at levels and speeds rather that we hadn't seen before. But what do you think is going to, happen trend-wise and towards the future?
Yeah, so I think that we'll see one of the perspectives that we have is that technology gives you a space to fail very rapidly, especially because in the biotech world, I think the numbers are about 95% of drugs fail to make it to market, right? And then it costs about an average of $1 to $2 billion to bring a drug to market, where a significant portion of that is failure. I think technology, especially software or inside the computer, whether it's data science or, you can pick your poison of adding lots of things together or deep generative adversarial networks, whichever one you want to use, will allow a lot of that failure to occur in the computer, and then validation done a lot in the lab, in animals and in humans. One of the things that we see is that obviously that reduces the cost in laboratories. We're going to start seeing more of these avatars, so representations of either humans or animals. So you'll potentially see a driving down of the utilization of animals in clinical trial, in preparing to submit to get approval for clinical trials. We're already starting to see that in organoid systems, where those can be used. Obviously, we'll need the regulators to buy into that. To be able to move that quickly, but we're seeing a lot of that happening in the the computer augmented decision making for radiologists and pathologists is also being, that can be transferred over. So just along the whole value chain, how we select patients, the number one drug in the world, the number one selling drug in the world, Humira, in gastroenterology, it's the first prescribed drug in IBD and Crohn's disease, but it doesn't work in about half the patients. And then they'll try a series of other drugs. So stratifying, better stratification of patient cohorts, because, for example, if you have breast cancer, there's a dozen different types of breast cancer. And then even within that, there are, a person from one area of the world who had one way of eating and living and environment is probably different from another person in the world. So their phenotypic response on top of their genotype. So stratifying patients will affect that. Now, that deals with everything through the pharma side of things. When we talk about healthcare, or biotech and pharma and life sciences, we talk about healthcare. I mean, I don't think we actually have a healthcare system in the United States. I think we have a sick care system in the United States, and the rest of the world in general, right? We're not waiting till people, we're waiting till people are ill. I think that there's going to be there's a lot of opportunity to try to help, not only help with prevention or quality of life for people, but also I think that there's the opportunity with the combination of synthetic biology and data science and understanding more about the individual. How can we help create healthcare for individuals in the real sense of helping people become more healthy? And I think understanding more about the individual really moves us from this idea of precision medicine, which is to say, given a certain patient, which drug should we choose to give them, as opposed to personalized medicine is saying, given a patient, right, like here's medicine designed just for that patient. And I think that we'll start to see a bit more of that transition as we collect more and more data. I think there's also we have to be conscious of like what kind of data we're collecting, how are we separating the data from the patient in a way that protects their privacy. So there's a whole host of issues that go along under that. Mm-hmm. But I think one of the biggest opportunities actually is the integration of synthetic biology and data science. I think that they really complement one another, and it's going to be transformative in the 21st century. I mean, CRISPR provides a huge opportunity there, but I mean, Michal mentioned multiple times Ginkgo Bioworks. I think that company along with Twist Bioscience are really going to transform the way that medicines are created, food is created, products are created, and hopefully create a much safer, better way of doing things for patients and the people that surround them. We don't just have to wait till people are sick.
Mm-hmm. Michal or Ron, anything you want to add there in terms of?
I wanted to give an example, but Ron, maybe you can go if you want. You can go first.
Go ahead, Michal.
So I was thinking that the audience may find this example quite interesting. So one of the things that I think as an industry we have been struggling with is this idea of controlled trials where people are given placebo and sometimes it comes at the expense of their health, right? I mean, but we didn't have a better method to truly measure the efficacy of a drug. And now, thanks to data science, we're able to create a synthetic arm, a synthetic control arm, because when you think about it, people exist in the real world who are not treated, and the evolution of their disease and the progression of their disease is now documented and can be used. So we can actually conduct trials now where we only have the treatment arm, and it may sound like a small thing, but it's actually a pretty dramatic advance. In the context of COVID, we used, and I think that was something that the public really cheered for. There was a lot of collaboration between different companies, and with the help of the regulators, we actually used a harmonized framework for development of multiple drugs. So we don't each have to do a control arm. So even that has saved so much of an effort, and also, of course, saved lives as well. The idea that we can do this now even more, synthetically is just going to revolutionize and also democratize. So the use of real world evidence, that's the term that we use in the industry, to understand better response, to understand disease, to understand patient population, to be able to develop drugs and conduct clinical trials more effectively. That is also an element that should not be underestimated, given the complexity of the drug development process.
Excellent.
And I would just add that there's a lot of interest that I see, at least on the academic side, in natural history studies of disease progression. And so I think that will also serve as a point for sort of the synthetic control, as Michal is pointing out. Yeah. Especially for rare, very rare diseases and small patient populations, where giving a placebo just doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I mean, you can imagine that in the future, each one of us will have a digital twin or a set of digital twins that have the same genetics, the same microbiome, the same zip code, and if we have any health issue, we will be able to look at our digital twin, who may be 10 years ahead of us, what the disease looks like, what treatments were tried and how they worked, and we will save ourselves out of trial and error. And this is unless it's replaced by something even better, I'm sure it will be reality in the foreseeable future.
Yeah, can I add something? We just actually spun out a company called GenoTwin, which is the exact idea, using, every individual may have a genetic twin out there. So if they've responded to a drug in one way, you would most likely respond to that drug in the same way, rather than having to do trial and error. So exactly what you're saying, it's happening.
That's a fascinating concept. And I'm excited to meet my digital twin someday and see how it might react to certain diseases and/or medicines in the future. And then, Ron, I'm going to ask one question. I'm going to quickly jump over to the academia section because we're starting to run low on time. But one of the questions we had was, how can academia best leverage relationships with the industry to expand the circle of innovation, feeding into the biotech industry? And then also the part two to that question. So I'll repeat the first question. How can academia best leverage relationships with industry to expand the circle of innovation, feeding into the biotech industry? And then also, what specific examples of academia and industry partnerships have you seen that work best?
Sure. So there's a lot of interest in innovation hubs. J&J has an innovation hub in I think, San Francisco, New York, and Boston, right? Columbia just launched a incubator space to basically take early stage companies that are coming out of the university, have them incubated in a space close to the university, which has shared lab space that could then develop into the next biotech companies and the bigger biotech companies. So I think that's a very successful model. There's other groups like IndieBio that is sort of investing in very early stage academic spinouts. There's definitely a tremendous amount of interest in helping faculty members and their postdocs take their early innovation and get it out of the lab and into a company. So in terms of successful models, I think those are very successful, and you see these companies growing up and graduating from those incubator centers and becoming full-fledged companies. And then the other model that we're seeing a lot is companies funding accelerators at the university to advance certain disease areas, like a company will be interested in GI innovations and will throw some money at the university for a call for proposals specific to specific areas of interest, and sort of fund research that is beyond federally funded research, sort of more translational in focus. And those are definitely very successful as well.
Yeah.
And I'm sure Michal may have a
maybe
bunch to add about this.
Yeah. So definitely, I mean, J&J is very strongly invested in this, but I'll just maybe focus on the benefit for a moment and put aside the, so when an academic lab is trying to describe or showcase or just make the discovery that is intended to be translated into a drug, usually it will approach it in the most pragmatic way. So, I have this model that I can deploy to test the efficacy of the drug. So this is what I'm going to do. It's not always the right disease. It's not always the right model. And there's scarce resources that are put into designing and executing the wrong experiment that really doesn't highlight the full potential or the right potential. And so having a collaboration with industry where access to the right model and guidance as to what will be needed downstream from those early experiments may be the most critical kind of transformational event that will determine the destiny of that technology or that innovation. So that is one thing. The other is that I think that by defining key problems, sometimes an industry collaborator can extract or maybe trigger the creation of innovation that is based on knowledge that was created in an academic setting, but would not have been used for that application. And I can use one very quick example from my Harvard experience. At the time, we partnered with a large food company that was trying to address an epidemic in their shrimp farms that was causing half the shrimp to die from a form of pancreatitis that was caused by a bacteria that, and because it's food, they couldn't use antibiotics. And they were really struggling, and this was something that they did not find a solution for. They brought this problem to the research community in one of those open innovation RFP-based collaborations, and actually the one of the investigators who was a microbiologist looked at the cause of that epidemic in the shrimp, and he realized that the bacterial strain that was causing it was very, very closely affiliated with the one that causes cholera in kids. And this person has been trying to develop a probiotic to fight cholera in kids in Africa for many years, but he could not get funding. So he looked at this and he said, actually, I think I can achieve two things by partnering with this company. I can probably deliver a probiotic, which would eliminate those bacteria in the shrimp farm. And while doing it, I can probably develop a product that can be used in children in Africa to prevent cholera. And so the moral of this story is that the knowledge was there, but it would never have met the need but for that collaboration. So this guy would continue to hope to cure cholera. These guys would continue to deal with the shrimp epidemic, and they would never find each other. But through this collaboration, they did, and the outcome was fantastic.
Fantastic. In lieu of time, I'm going to try to address a couple of the questions that have trickled in. I know we didn't get through a lot of the questions that we had curated for the panelists, but let me jump in here and see if we can wrap up with a couple of questions from that are in the chat room. Let's see, I've got a question here from Dan Lee. He heard from the news that COVID will stay with us for many years. Assuming that is true, do the panelists see the 4 vaccine producers continue to be vaccine leaders? Or given the amount of new capital going into this space, do panelists see early stage biotech companies having a shot at becoming meaningful players in developing and making vaccines for evolving virus?
So I'll just give one news bullet, and it's not for a vaccine, but there's a company that was just raised their first Series A of $24 million called Ren Bio in New York City to develop a COVID therapeutic antibody. So there is money going into early biotech for potentially developing therapeutic antibodies. I think the competition against the vaccine makers may be steep, and there is continuous involvement of the variants. So the question will be whether the antibodies that are in development now will be sufficient for treatment of the variants as the vaccine or as the virus evolves. But there's money going there.
I think the emergency use authorizations will make it a bit more challenging for new players to get in the space. I know that the FDA is I think they made a decision a couple of weeks ago to start to ratchet down the number of emergency use authorizations. So it gives a significant head start to companies that are very well funded: AstraZeneca, J&J, Moderna. And I think it'll be hard for other players to come into the space. It's not going to be impossible. And then eventually, I think there'll be the sort of New York pizza style driving down of price potentially that just happens naturally in economics. But I'm with Ron on the perspective that we're going to need to see more therapeutics as that intervention for those interventions. If COVID's here to stay and our bodies don't develop natural resistance to having serious illness from it, we're going to need therapeutics even as a bridge to COVID. And I think that there's possibly a lot of transferring of some of that science to other problems. And I think that's where a lot of excitement can happen. You see a lot of companies raising money to do X, and then they end up doing Y because they've discovered some novel solution in the lab that they never thought of. A good example of that was, look at Viagra. It started as a heart drug, ended up being for something else. And so we may see similar types of actions happen. But in the vaccine space, I think the big guys are they're gonna own the vast majority of the market share in that space. That being said, I think we're gonna see a lot more vaccines for a lot of different diseases. And the other thing that I think is gonna be, there's gonna be some heavy investment in is the antimicrobial resistance. I think it's a big problem. And I think people have known it's been a problem, just like people knew something like COVID was going to happen. But I think we'll start to see more preemptive work, and I think that's really beneficial.
I think that was a great summary of reality. I just mentioned, and I think you hinted to this, the heavy lifting on scale up and manufacturing and distribution. I think it cannot be underestimated. I think we hear in the news when something goes wrong, but what has been going right to enable all of this is just incredible and very hard to replicate. And also we started, I think, very, very luckily. I mean, I regard it personally as a miracle that, those mRNA vaccines came on the market and with such high efficacy from day one and safety. It's just fantastic and incredible. So I don't think that we're witnessing necessarily the somewhat typical case in which there are some, kind of reasonable products that come on the market and are followed very quickly with better ones, and then best in class is third generation. I think here maybe we met the third generation on day one.
Well, that is great to hear, and we do have some more questions that are trickling in from the chat room, but I also want to be cognizant of everyone's time here. We do have to wrap this up, especially since our panelists are actually based on the East Coast. So I want to be respectful of their time and day. But I do want to thank you all very, very much for helping us out, for volunteering your time and talking to us about this exciting space in biotech. You all provided some fantastic answers, and everybody who's on the call, I think, is very, very grateful to hear from you.
Thank
So
you.
if you want
I appreciate it. I learned a lot from Andrew and Ron and from your questions, Christian. And so thank you all for
Thank you for the invitation. It was a pleasure.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And well, I hope everybody has a great rest of the week, and look forward to the great work that you're all doing.
Excuse me, possible to ask a question before you disappear, everybody?
Sure.
Short question?
Sure.
Yeah, I'd like to talk. I'm creator of a company called Planetary Protech, and we're building a quarantine suit based on a spacesuit for Mars. Now, this may sound like a pretty big stretch, but because of actually international requirements, NASA and all countries are forbidden from either doing forward or backward contamination. You can't drop anything off that might affect life, and you can't bring anything back. And needless to say, in order to do that, you have to be able to have some idea about what you're talking about bringing back in the way of pathogens. So about 10 years ago, a project at UC Berkeley attempted to design a spacesuit for Mars that would not allow anything to come back. And it was based on assuming a virus level size of 1/10 of a micron, which most of you probably know is smaller than a coronavirus individual virus, and attempted to embody that in a suit that would be lightweight and usable for Mars. And we've been working on this for the better part of almost a decade. And when COVID came along, it wasn't much of a stretch to see, can you use such technology in a lightweight PPE that would be inexpensive, that would prevent not only COVID, but future pathogens from even getting out. And I have to say, we've managed to do that. This suit, which is called the Q suit, is now funded on an initial level in the UK. It's going through certification as we speak. It's a very difficult market to penetrate because most PPEs are cheap. They're made in China. They simply don't work. They're throwaway, and this is reusable. You can wear it all day long. It'll cost less than $200, and it's fully redundant and has a helmet that provides the same airflow that an astronaut gets, along with a whole bunch of other bells and whistles that I might add. It's part of a bigger strategy called ROR. ROR stands for Rapid Outbreak Response. So the idea, the business model here, and we haven't looked for venture capital. If anybody's interested in looking at us as a venture capital depository, we're happy to talk to you. But what ROR means is that on a subscription basis, you would have access to up to 500 of these Q suits. Q stands for quarantine. And the minute an outbreak is identified, within a radius of 5 to 10 miles, everybody within that radius would don one of these suits. And these suits, you can wear them 8 hours a day. There's options for being able to eat, for being able to go to the bathroom. They're extremely comfortable, extremely lightweight. I'd have to give a whole talk to tell you all about it and everything that's gone into it. But the notion is, if you distribute it rapidly at the first notion of an outbreak, then you have a chance of separating those who are infected from those who are not. Because once you're in that Q suit, assuming there's a 14-day quarantine period, which is what you're talking about, you would see who develops symptoms and doesn't. You would actually be able to separate out the crowd. And you may not have a vaccine to this. We're talking about a future pandemic. We're talking about a future pathogen. You know, originally this was studied for bringing back alien pathogens from space, but it's not much of a stretch to realize that what we're doing to the planet, you can get a pathogen we're not familiar with. So I'm thinking from the very first time.
Larry, I could chime in here about this actually a little bit. So one of the big challenges is that because these viruses are zoonotic in nature and they jump from animals to humans. So for example, I mean, assuming that COVID didn't come out of a lab, I'm not going to debate whether it did or not, just assuming that it didn't and it came from an animal, a lot of these zoonotic viruses jump. And one of the big challenges that we have is that we don't have diagnostics for most of these. So there's actually no way to differentiate, especially in the case of COVID where symptoms weren't clear. There's no way actually to differentiate patients from those who have and those who don't. And it's a big, big problem in the space because as these viruses evolve. I know that when the military descends upon these regions and CDC and various other types of researchers, they have these really amazing suits. Now, I can't speak, I'm not a PPE guy, so I don't know enough about it, but I know one of the big challenges is that there aren't diagnostics in the space to really differentiate. So when we have these outbreaks, and oftentimes, interestingly enough, like, for example, there were probably a lot of people who had SARS in Wuhan, or some version of SARS in Wuhan, when it started up. But the thing was, it hadn't mutated in a way to jump from human to human, right? If it did come from bats, it's not like we're all hanging out with bats all the time, right? Like, we are all hanging out with humans all the time. And so this is part of the challenge, right? Because people could have it, but it may not be transmissible. And so they could get very sick, and you may inadvertently give all these people these suits, and they may not actually need it. So I think there's a lot of, and then there's obviously the logistical challenge of putting out there. I mean, I think the technology is great. I think it's understanding how it can be applied and thinking about it rather than a potential solution to this particular problem as part of the overarching solution. But I didn't know if you had a question. I just wanted to bring that up because we're working on
Well, yeah,
and maybe just make a recommendation just to follow. I mean, if you haven't talked to BARDA yet, then you should. And the other person I would suggest that you contact is Bob Nelson from Arch Ventures, who just personally has become very interested in kind of COVID, let's say, prevention, and he talked a lot about, he actually in his blog, he described how he moved out of state and locked himself up in, like an atomic shelter. And he is the guy who controls, major investment. He just created this company called National Resilience that is targeting manufacturing of anything that is needed for a pandemic. And so Bob Nelson, maybe try LinkedIn, and BARDA.
Well, I'd appreciate it if you could somehow text me those sources. I did go to Johnson & Johnson in the first couple of weeks of this. Never did manage to get to anybody. When you're creating something like this, you try to get to a CEO or a person who can do it. Yeah. Pretty tough. So you operate in the back.
Lawrence, I
will put my email address in the chat, and you can write me, and I'll give you the name and also connect you to someone who can make an introduction to BARDA. Because we will probably not. I mean, the reason J&J is kind of the wrong place is the outlet is that we would not sell something like this, but we can make. I can make the connection to BARDA.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you again, everyone. I really enjoyed it. I know everybody who was able to listen in enjoyed it as well. And then we'll probably wind up posting the link, and I'll certainly be sending that out to all the panelists as well with the recording. Thanks again, everyone.
Very much.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Have a great evening.
Thank you. You
Bye,
too.
everybody.
Bye-bye.